Hello. Welcome to Aerobiology and the Principles of Air Filtration. What do we need to know? My name is Pete Raynor. I'm a faculty member at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health in the Division of Environmental Health Sciences. This presentation is modified from one given at the Lehman Swine Conference in 2012. The topics I will cover, in order, include classifications of filters, mechanical filtration mechanisms, standard filter tests, importance of pressure drop, bioaerosols and their filtration, filtration of particles by electrostatic attraction, and filter performance with use. There are two main classifications of filters, fabric filters and fibrous filters. As the images show, fabric filters are woven or felted fabrics, whereas fibrous filters are non-woven beds of fibers randomly oriented in the two dimensions perpendicular to airflow. Fabric filters, as I indicated before, are woven or felted fabrics. They can be made from many different kinds of fabrics. Most commonly, they are used for industrial gas cleaning because they can handle high dust concentrations. Fabric filters collect particles primarily on the surface of the fabric. They use previously collected particles to obtain high efficiency that approaches 100% as the dust cake builds up on the fabric. These filters are cleaned repeatedly during use either by shaking them or with a reverse airflow or a reverse pulse of air. Cleaning is performed to avoid an unacceptable pressure drop, and the cleaning is usually triggered at a set time interval or in response to an elevated pressure drop across the filters. The fraction of the incoming particles that gets captured is usually the primary concern in the performance of fabric filters, along with pressure drop. As mentioned before, fibrous filters are beds of randomly oriented fibers that generally are used to produce clean air for use. These filters can be manufactured from many different fiber materials. They are not intended for high dust concentrations because they cannot be cleaned. So, to permit long periods of use, fibrous filters are generally used with lower concentration dusts. These filters collect particles both on the filter surface and within the depth of the filter, but the depth is more important to overall efficiency. By designing the filter appropriately, you can achieve virtually any efficiency desired. Therefore, fibrous filters can be more efficient than any other particle collector. They are generally discarded after use because the particles cannot be removed readily by cleaning. When the pressure drop gets too high, the filters are changed to avoid that unacceptable pressure drop. Frequently, how much of the incoming aerosol gets through is the primary concern. These types of filters are used commonly for ventilation purposes, including ventilation for swine facilities. The parameters around which decisions are made regarding the type of filter to purchase include the cost, but we are not going to talk too much about that in this presentation. The efficiency, how much of the incoming particles a filter collects, and alternatively the penetration, how much gets through, are important, and we will talk about both of these parameters in detail. The resistance to airflow, which is typically measured as pressure drop, is also important. This parameter is related to energy costs and helps determine how much airflow gets through the filter. We will talk a lot about resistance as well. Let's talk about the mechanisms of filtration, starting first with mechanical filtration mechanisms. Mechanical mechanisms are physical processes that do not include electrical effects. The first figure illustrates one of the mechanisms, which is called interception. The image shows the circular cross-section of a cylindrical fiber that would be perpendicular to the screen inside a cylindrical region surrounding the fiber. You can see an arrow showing the direction of airflow past the fiber and a streamline going around the fiber. Of course, the streamline must bend to go around the fiber. The concept behind interception is that particles follow streamlines around the fiber and some will be collected by the fiber when they come in contact with it. The illustration shows the limiting streamline where the particle just barely comes in contact with the fiber. Particles starting closer to the center line will also be collected by interception, whereas those starting farther away from the center line will not be collected by interception. The second mechanism is impaction. Particles with sufficient mass will be able to leave the streamline due to inertia and collide with the fiber and be collected. The third primary mechanical filtration mechanism is diffusion. Due to Brownian motion, small particles can move away from the streamline. With this random motion, some of the particles will collide with the fiber and be collected. So these are the three main mechanical filtration mechanisms: interception, impaction, and diffusion. This plot shows model predictions for the efficiency of a typical single filter fiber at collecting particles. The figure shows single fiber efficiency on a logarithmic scale plotted against particle diameter, also on a logarithmic scale. The curves for interception and impaction efficiency show that single fiber efficiency increases with increasing particle diameter for these mechanisms. On the other hand, diffusion efficiency decreases with increasing particle diameter. When you add up those three mechanisms to come up with a single fiber efficiency curve combining all the mechanisms, you can see that there is a minimum efficiency for particles between about 0.1 and 0.3 micrometers in diameter. This is a typical curve for the total efficiency of a medium efficiency filter, this time on a linear scale, versus particle diameter still on a logarithmic scale. Here we are defining efficiency as a fraction ranging from 0 to 1. We could also define efficiency on a percentage basis ranging from 0% to 100%. We see a minimum efficiency for this filter similar to what we saw for the single fiber, with a region of higher efficiency for larger particles due to impaction and interception, and another region of higher efficiency for small particles due to diffusion. One of the misconceptions about filtration is that filters act like sieves, allowing the smallest particles to get through. That's not true. Small particles can be collected very efficiently by fibrous filters. The bigger concern when selecting filters, if only mechanical filtration mechanisms are considered, is for particles a little larger than 0.1 micrometers in diameter. Efficiency is the fraction or percentage of particles collected by a filter, often for a specific particle diameter. Penetration, on the other hand, is the fraction or percentage that gets through a filter and can also be calculated as a function of a specific particle diameter. If we consider efficiency as being between 0 and 1, penetration is equal to 1 minus the fractional efficiency. This plot shows the efficiency curve from the previous slide. If we want to consider penetration, we can just flip that curve over. Instead of having a minimum efficiency between 0.1 and 0.3 micrometers, we have a maximum penetration between those sizes and zero penetration for the smallest and largest particles on the figure. A professional organization formerly called the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, now just called ASHRAE, develops standards for testing the efficiency of filters, specifically heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or HVAC, filters. Over the years, 3 different standard metrics have been used to assess the efficiency of filter products. The first is arrestance, which was designated in ASHRAE Standard 52.1, 1992. Although this standard has been withdrawn, the arrestance test is included as an addendum in the current ASHRAE Standard 52.2, 2007. This test measures the percentage of a test dust captured by a filter on a mass basis. This is a test that is effective for low efficiency filters. The second test, which is no longer used, was the dust spot efficiency test that was the primary standard test for filter efficiency for many years. This test measured efficiency by observing the amount of staining atmospheric dust removed by a test filter. It was an odd test protocol that, while used for many years, did not provide detailed information on filter efficiency for different particle sizes. An improved test was developed in ASHRAE Standard 52.2, 1999, and revised somewhat in Standard 52.2, 2007. It's the MERV rating, or Minimum Efficiency Reporting Value. In this test protocol, efficiency is measured in 3 different size intervals. This protocol also includes some conditioning of a test filter, or loading of the filter with particles, to see if efficiency changes as the filter collects particles. The MERV ratings do not directly reflect the efficiency of a filter. It is a scale, shown in this table, for which a higher rating reflects higher efficiency. For instance, a MERV 10 filter has efficiency between 50 and 65% for particles 1 to 3 micrometers in diameter, and greater than 85% for particles between 3 and 10 micrometers in diameter. In contrast, a MERV 14 filter would have efficiency between 75 and 85% for a smaller particle size range between 0.3 and 1 micrometer in diameter, and greater than 90% efficiency for particles 1 to 3 and 3 to 10 micrometers in diameter. Most filters sold today will have a MERV rating if they are used as ventilation filters. The filters used in swine barns should have these ratings. How are filters part of a system in swine operations? For simplicity, let's assume that a swine building is one big room with one exhaust fan and many openings where air could enter the building. Before filtration is added, the fan will exhaust air and then air will enter the room through the openings. When filtration is added to swine buildings, a common practice is to make the buildings more airtight at the same time so that there are fewer openings and more air will enter through the remaining openings. If we add filtration, in the figure we are adding just one filter for simplicity, most of the air coming into the building should pass through the filters, but there will still be a little bit of air that comes through leaks in the building envelope. Dust collecting on the filter leads to greater resistance to airflow through the filter and higher pressure drop across the filter. As this occurs, it is harder to draw air through the filter. Instead, more air is going to enter through the leaks. It's important to have a regular schedule for changing out filters so that the pressure drop does not build up too much. Otherwise, the filters will be less effective because it will be too difficult for air to flow through them, and much of the air will come in through the leaks, bypassing the filters. Pressure drop is often measured with a gauge such as the common magnehelic gauge shown in the image. Magnehelic gauges are available in a wide array of ranges to accommodate the pressure differences that need to be monitored. On the back and side of these gauges are pressure taps. There is a low pressure tap and a high pressure tap. The high pressure tap can be connected via tubing to a location upstream from the filter before the air reaches the filter, and the low pressure tap can be connected with tubing to a point downstream from the filter after the air has passed through. The pressure drop across the filter will then be able to be read on the gauge. Let's talk a little bit now about biological aerosols, or bioaerosols, and their filtration. There are many different categories of bioaerosols. The ones most relevant to swine operations are viruses and bacteria, but there are others including fungi, pollen, animal allergens, fragments of any of these materials, fecal matter, and dust from animal feed. This chart, from a book by Bill Hines, shows typical sizes of different types of particles, including bioaerosols, as highlighted on the chart. Individual viruses range in size from about 10 nanometers, or 0.01 micrometers, to about 200 nanometers, or 0.2 micrometers. Individual bacteria range in size from about 0.2 micrometers to around 15 micrometers. Fungi and pollen are larger. We can ask the question, are bioaerosols interesting? Well, of course they are, because of their potential ability to spread diseases in swine operations and elsewhere. Are they wildly exotic particles? No. As an aerosol scientist, I would say that bioaerosols are not wildly exotic in general. Particles like those shown in these images are much more exotic to me. We generated these particles in a study where we were measuring the generation of particles from the shredding of composite plastics. These particles are agglomerate chains or aggregates of smaller primary particles. To me, as an aerosol scientist, these particles are exotic. Individual viruses and bacteria, or viruses and bacteria inside of other particles, are not nearly as strange. Viruses and bacteria are typically not separate particles by themselves. Because they are frequently aerosolized by breathing or speaking, or coughing or sneezing, they are mixed with saliva or respiratory fluid. This figure from Holmgren and co-authors shows particles produced by humans both during normal tidal breathing and during breathing with airway closures when a subject is ill. There are many particles larger than individual viruses or bacteria, especially when someone is sick. We cannot just think of bioaerosols as individual viruses or bacteria. They are more likely particles in which viruses or bacteria are embedded. Some components of these particles may be able to protect or sustain any viruses or bacteria that are present. We can ask the question, do filters collect bioaerosols? Published research indicates that they collect bioaerosols just fine. Almost 20 years ago, Kemp and co-authors showed that filters collected particles with high efficiency over time. The data in these figures were collected over a period of more than a year for two different types of filter media, a fiberglass media and a polymer fiber media. These filters collected particles with at least 80% efficiency over the entire study, both for fungi and for bacteria. Ford and co-authors showed that specific viruses, bacteria, and fungi were collected similarly to solid or liquid non-biological particles of the same size. Biological particles, shown as bars covering the particle size range at which they were produced, correspond very well with the curves that were developed for liquid and solid particles. Enninger and co-authors measured similar penetration for a virus aerosol, MS2 bacteriophage, as for non-biological sodium chloride particles through several different kinds of respirator filters over the same size range for both types of particles. Do we care that biological particles are being filtered? Of course, because they can carry disease, we care that they are being filtered. Does the filter care if it is filtering a bioaerosol particle? No. To the filter, a biological particle is just another particle that obeys the laws of physics. As long as particles have the same diameter, they are collected with the same efficiency, whether they are biological or non-biological particles. So, to answer the question from several slides ago, filters do collect bioaerosols. In addition to the mechanical filtration mechanisms, another important mechanism used by many HVAC filters to collect particles is electrostatic attraction. Many particles in the atmosphere naturally carry small amounts of electrical charge. Because the particles are so small, it can be very effective to use the charge to capture them. These so-called electret filters are made from fibers that carry both positive and negative charges at the same time. When particles carry charge, they are attracted by charges of opposite sign on the fibers. In this example, the negative charge on the fiber will attract the positively charged particle and potentially allow it to be captured by these coulombic forces. If it was a positive charge on the fiber, it would be effective at collecting negatively charged particles. Particles that carry no charge can still be attracted to fibers that carry charge because the charge on the fibers will induce a temporary dipole on the particle and attract the particle in that way. In both cases, this leads to higher efficiency than if the fibers were not charged. The influence of electrostatic attraction on filter efficiency is illustrated in this figure from a 1998 study by Romay and co-authors. The figure shows four curves of particle penetration, not efficiency, on a logarithmic scale versus particle diameter on a log scale. Curve number 1 is for a filter that carried electrostatic charges and particles that each carried one elemental charge. Curve number 2 is for the same charged filter with particles that were neutral and did not carry a net charge. Curves number 3 and number 4 are for filters that were electrically discharged by washing them in alcohol. For curve number 3, these filters were used to collect particles that carry one elemental charge, whereas for curve number 4, they collected particles that were not carrying any charge. We can see that the lowest penetration and highest efficiency occurred when both the filter and particles carried charge in curve 1. In contrast, the highest penetration and lowest efficiency occurred in curve number 4 when both the filters and the particles did not carry charge. If we compare curve number 1 to curve number 3, we can see the effect that filter charging can have on the capture of charged particles due to coulombic forces. When we compare curve number 2 to curve number 4, we can see the effect that filter charging has on neutral particles due to inducement of a dipole moment. Electrostatic attraction is an important filtration mechanism because it can enhance the capture of airborne particles beyond the mechanical filtration mechanisms. So what kinds of performance improvements do electret filters allow? With electrostatic attraction, filter manufacturers can design a filter that has lower pressure drop, the resistance to airflow, for the same efficiency, or higher efficiency for the same pressure drop, or resistance to airflow. There are several important applications for electret filters, including large building HVAC filtration, potentially including swine operations, filters used in home furnaces, filters used for respiratory protection, and some air pollution control filters. Next, let's talk about the performance of electret filters over time as they are used to collect particles, because their performance can change with time. I'm going to discuss a study that we performed to measure efficiency and pressure drop for electrostatically charged filters for several months in an operating HVAC system at the University of Minnesota. We compared their performance to that of uncharged filters in a virtually identical system operating in the same building. You can see the reference to the paper in which we published the results that I'm about to show you. This is an image of the test filters, typical of those seen in many HVAC systems. The yellow filter was made from a glass fiber medium that did not carry permanent electrostatic charges. The blue filter was a synthetic polymer fiber filter that did carry electrostatic charges. The filters were the same size, and each had an initial efficiency rating of 90 to 95% according to the now outdated dust spot efficiency test that was standard at the time. 30 of the fiberglass filters were placed in an air handling unit in Hasselmo Hall on the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, and 30 of the electret filters were placed in another air handling unit serving the same building. The intakes to the two air handling systems were directly adjacent to one another, and, because this is a laboratory building, no air from inside the building was recirculated through these systems. The image shows our sampling probes located upstream and downstream from each filter bank. We measured particle concentrations as a function of size at 4 locations both upstream and downstream from each filter bank, so that we could calculate efficiency as a function of particle diameter. Because these were operating HVAC systems, our measurements were subject to both short-term and long-term variability in incoming particle concentrations. Therefore, our strategy was to take many measurements over the test period to allow us to draw conclusions even from a highly variable data set. The calendar shows that we measured efficiency on 26 occasions over the course of 134 days, about 4.5 months, back in 2001. We measured more frequently at the beginning of the test period before moving to approximately 1-week intervals in the later stages of the test. This plot shows measurements of pressure drop versus time after installation. The yellow data represent the fiberglass filter, and the blue data represent the synthetic polyolefin fiber electret filter. We see that the filters had very similar pressure drops throughout the test period. The pressure drop increased gradually over time before going up more quickly at the end due to blockage of the filters with collected particles. As I indicated previously, a well-designed electret filter should have lower pressure drop than a non-electret filter for the same efficiency, or higher efficiency for the same pressure drop. Because the polyolefin filter in this study had the same initial efficiency rating and same pressure drop as the fiberglass filter, we can conclude that it is not a well-designed electret filter. These figures show the filter efficiency as a function of diameter at the beginning and the end of the test period for each type of filter. On the left, the green data and curve represent the filter efficiency for the uncharged fiberglass filters just after they were installed. The yellow data and curve show the efficiency after 134 days of use. There were no statistically significant differences between the day 0 and day 134 efficiency measurements, except for the very smallest particle sizes that exhibited a small increase in efficiency. On the right, the green data and curve represent the day 0 data for the synthetic electret filters, whereas the blue data and curve represent the performance on day 134. There was an obvious and statistically significant reduction in efficiency with use evident for particles smaller than about 1.5 micrometers in diameter. Similar results have been seen before in the laboratory studies that prompted us to perform this real-world study. It is interesting to look at the change in efficiency at multiple time points for particles of a specific diameter. This figure shows efficiency plotted as a function of time for both sets of filters for particles approximately 1 micrometer in diameter. Curves are drawn through the data for each type of filter. We can see that over the entire test, the uncharged fiberglass filters did not show significant change in efficiency with time, while the synthetic media exhibited a decrease immediately after installation through about 3 months of use, and then increased, possibly as the filter began to clog with collected particles. It is important to note that this study was performed in Minneapolis in an urban environment. We would expect clogging to take longer than 3 to 4 months in a rural location. So what went on during this test? First, the electret filters made from synthetic fibers did not work as well as they should have when clean, so we did not see the advantage that they should have when they are clean. Second, the synthetic fiber filters exhibited a substantial decrease in efficiency as they were used. The scientific literature indicates that it is likely that the collected particles shielded the permanent electrostatic charges on the filter fibers, making them less effective at helping to capture the incoming particles than they were when the filters were clean. Finally, it is important to note that these results represent what happened in Minneapolis during one period of time using 2 particular kinds of filters in 2 particular HVAC systems. We felt it would be best to try to replicate this work in a different situation. Therefore, we conducted a similar study in a different building on the University of Minnesota campus using different fiberglass and synthetic electret filters. This plot shows pressure drop as a function of time after installation. In this study, the electret filters made from synthetic fibers had much lower pressure drop than the fiberglass filters, even though they had approximately the same initial filtration efficiency. Thus, this is a well-designed synthetic filter. The lower pressure drop is what you should see and is an important advantage for electret filters because lower pressure drop means less energy use. Data for changes in efficiency over time showed similar differences between the fiberglass and synthetic fiber filters as in the other study. The fiberglass filters showed essentially no change in efficiency between day 2 of use and day 85 of the test, whereas the electret filters made from synthetic fibers exhibited very large efficiency decreases between day 2 and day 90 of the test. Important implications of these studies are that properly designed filters made from electrostatically charged fibers should have a pressure drop and/or initial efficiency advantage. This is an important advantage for electret filters. However, the data also show that people or animals inside buildings will receive greater exposure to outdoor contaminants over time as electret filters are used than when they are new and clean because of the increase in penetration through the filters as the electrical charges are blocked by collected particles. There is clearly a trade-off. Swine operations need to ask themselves, is the reduced pressure drop or higher initial efficiency worth the reductions in efficiency over time from the standpoint of protecting pigs from potential infection from whatever is carried in the air? I don't have a good answer for this. It may be an area for future research to figure out the sweet spot for having lower pressure drop versus potentially getting more bioaerosol particles into the facility over time. Let's summarize the most important points from the talk. A particle size is the key factor determining if it is captured as it passes through a filter. Frequently, and in particular as you think about trying to protect swine, what gets through or around a filter is more important than what gets collected. This requires a slightly different mindset than thinking only about what gets captured on filters. Resistance to airflow increases as particles collect on a filter, and that increased resistance means that more particles are going to enter a building through unfiltered pathways. This is particularly the case for swine buildings. It's important to keep in mind that particles containing viruses and bacteria are filtered just like non-biological particles of the same size. Some filters utilize fibers carrying electrostatic charge to enhance their performance. However, filters that carry electrostatic charges lose efficiency as they collect particles. That change in efficiency does not necessarily mean that electric filters should not be used, because they can have important advantages in pressure drop and efficiency. However, users should consider their filters and potential changes in performance over time in the context of their entire system. The performance of filtration systems in swine operations over time is an area that we need to study more. For additional information on this topic, you can contact me at the University of Minnesota. My phone number and email address are listed here. Thank you for viewing this presentation. I hope it is helpful.